Garnaak tensed and gave a side-eye to the human, watching the lake below with his other two. This was it, the moment of truth, the deciding moment of his mission to Earth. Nothing else mattered if this failed. The human sitting across from Garnaak was mesmerized. "Sapphire, isn't it?" the human asked. "My favorite." Relief spread through Garnaak, and he puffed through 3 gillicles, spreading his 3 claws in supplication. "I hope it meets your expectations." Garnaak's translator relayed his sprach in a soft baritone of English. Sprach was the primary method of communication for Garnaak's kind. Gillicles were sufficient for interacting with his own race, but not much use talking to humans. They were better suited for filtering the denser gases of his home planet. Here, they allowed him to breathe the rarefied human atmosphere. It was up to his translator to handle all the heavy lifting when it came to communication. Sydney swirled the martini glass, peering through the crystal-clear, icy liquid with a twist of yellow dangling from the top. "And even a lemon twist. Garnaak, you've learned well." "Better than you. It's Garnaak." "Right, that's what I said. Garnaak." Garnaak couldn't sigh. His breathing chambers and gillicles prevented that by design, but he wished he could. Sydney did try to say it right, but he could just barely produce a guttural ack. Lack of gillicles limited human sprach to such a small frequency range. No wonder they couldn't communicate with other intelligent residents on their own planet. 100-ton behemoths happily dwelled in the oceans, chatting all day long. Garnaak suspected all sorts of cetaceans would gladly sprach if given the chance. They had the vocalizations and auditory receptors for it. But that was not the mission here and now. Perhaps someday, when humanity was ready, the cetaceans and their deep ocean kin might finally join the conversation. For now, Garnaak would wait. Sydney took a cautious sip and smiled, beaming at Garnaak. "Yep, outstanding. Couldn't have stirred a better one myself. Where do you learn to do this?" The translator squeaked and missed a few beats. Carson repeats, "That's what we used in training. Hard to get anything more recent during our FTL trip here. Everything we had received before our departure from home was at least decades old. But of course, I spend a lot of free time now digesting your more current video stories." Garnaak's other 2 eyes dilated with satisfaction. He'd passed the test. Neighbors can be so fussy. Garnaak had learned that the hard way, on other missions, on other planets. But humans seem to be the most. Tiny details seem to set them off on random tangents, losing track of where they were or what they were even doing. Important things fell by the wayside, with simple distractions grabbing them at the most inopportune time. Like their fixations of staring at their handheld pieces of glass, as if the world would end and they would miss it. This human was as good as any, maybe better. No obligations, no expectations, just neighbors. It was their unassuming hallway encounters that had encouraged Garnaak to reach out and invite Sydney for cocktails. The new neighbor had moved in after the former ones had suddenly left, just after Garnaak had arrived. The previous tenants had never gotten comfortable around Garnaak, and he hadn't pressed it. But Sydney was different. Their in and out schedules seemed to coincide. The end-of-the-day meeting on Garnaak's condo balcony had become routine. Garnaak swiveled his huge bulk on his special stool, shifting one of his 3 legs around the other side to edge closer to the balcony rail. He kept one eye on Sydney and surveyed the lake with the other 2. "There, the great blue. He's always here at happy hour." Garnaak loved using the human idioms, the clicking, popping sounds he made translated so well into almost poetic resonance. The pauses between his staccato sprach and the audio from the button on his chest were practically imperceptible, and humans like Sydney didn't seem to mind. It was the one token concession for his mission. Useless tech for the humans, explicitly tuned to his race's DNA and sprach powered by his body chemistry. "He's one of my favourites too," Sydney said. "He just stands there at the edge or wades in a few feet and is so patient. Then, boom, he darts his head into the water so quick you can hardly see and comes out with dinner. Patience, yes, a fine quality, rewarded in time. Not a trait shared between humans and herons," Garnaak thought to himself. Humans could learn something from their own planet dwellers. They didn't need space visitors like me to uplift them. It was their discussions of the denizens of the lake that occupied most of their time together on the balcony. Garnaak wasn't surprised at his neighbour's lack of knowledge of the waterfowl. For Sydney, they were like furniture, a commonplace fixture of the scenery. But for Garnaak, he was enthralled by their variety and behaviour. Of all the birds, one kind was his favourite. All the others seemed to come in groups or solo, but this was a pair, always together. After spotting them again and again, Garnaak's curiosity got the better of him, and he allowed himself to use Earth tech to do local research. Shortly after he and his fellow spacefarers arrived, the humans realized they needed a reliable way to keep in touch with the visitors when not face-to-face. And they had the perfect tech, a fortuitous human invention, and had worldwide infrastructure to support it, ensuring the space visitors' mission could rely solely on Earth tech. The humans provided each of the space visitors with small handheld glass plates and larger pad-sized ones. When combined with the translators that each of the spacefarers wore, everything needed for unfettered communication was in place. It was perhaps ironic that the glass plates were designed with speech in addition to visuals. When Garnaak sprach a question, his translator asked the glass in the language it understood. And when the images and videos appeared with accompanying information and audio, his translator sprach it back to him in the clicks and chirps that he needed to hear. And best of all, it let him while away his idle hours digesting as many of the human video stories as time would permit. He learned a tremendous amount, especially from the humorous ones called science fiction. But Garnaak realized it was far more than a device for talking via video and watching stories. It opened a portal into all the knowledge of Earth. He embraced it as a tool for research, foraging for as much as he could find on the water creatures. He absorbed so much that he would regale a moderately interested Sydney with trivia during their many happy hours together. The birds became a recurring, non-committal topic that formed a common reference point. In one of their early times together, Garnaak had offered his insights on a particular set of waterfowl. "They are mottled ducks, you know. They're only in this region of Earth." "Really?" Sydney had perked up, attentive despite himself. "But this does not appear to be a breeding pair. Even though they have little dimorphism, you can tell by their beaks." Sydney had furrowed his brow in an expression that Garnaak had learned meant a human didn't quite understand. "But they do seem to hang out together a lot." Garnaak wasn't sure how Sydney felt about non-binary interactions, so he proceeded cautiously, unsure of human taboos. "They are two females, black beaks with orange tips." He had explained to Sydney that they were not quite mallards, and not blacks, but were something in between. Garnaak had even asked his glass pad to explain the seeming oddity, and sure enough, it had told him that it was not unusual for the ducks to have same-sex pairing for life. No issue for them, it was in their nature. "Ah, good friends hang together, huh?" was all Sydney had offered. "Indeed, and it's been several years now. I've watched them ever since I rented this—" Garnaak's translator had stumbled looking for a word to describe the unit he lived in. "They're constantly together, like they are tethered to one another. The seasons come and go, and they are always here, even before and after those hurricanes. I find it a most interesting behaviour. I've decided to call them the two ladies. They don't seem to be bothered that they are one and the same, no stigma for them." Chapter 2. It was another fine evening on the balcony, and Sydney was enjoying his martini. Garnaak decided to try something new. His left side eye focused on him. "How was your day?" he twittered, hoping the translator had done it right. Sydney choked on a sip, sputtering before breaking into laughter. "Seriously, Garny, eek! What is this? Leave it to Beaver? It's too bad that the time dilation of your travel left you stuck watching shows from the late 50s. Garnaak's hue yellowed, and he was unsure if his translator correctly interpreted Sydney's response. "Oof, has that custom expired?" Sydney grinned, wiping the corner of his mouth. "Yeah, last century. First, that's what a homebody, maybe a wife, would ask their spouse, perhaps a hubby. Don't see either of those among us two." Sydney gave a very human chuckle that even Garnaak understood. "No offence intended," Garnaak chirped through his translator. "Ah, Garny, don't be silly. It's okay. You mean well and get most of it spot on. So, forget paying out niceties. Most humans bungle them anyway and are totally disingenuous. But I appreciate the effort. You blend right in. Well, sort of. Except for your, size and shape? Colour? 3 eyes?" Garnaak's translator couldn't turn the tittering flute from his gillicles into a laugh, but Sydney smiled, knowing he was being teased. Garnaak gave a slow, deliberate bow, since he couldn't nod like a human. This time, the translator relaying the gesture into human-appropriate timing. "Sid, you are good to put up with my slow learning." Sydney smirked. "That's not what I would say. You're here, renting a condo at the port, right at the Cape. For how long? It's been a few years now, hasn't it? And you've been on Earth, what, 5 years? And now you and I watch the launches day and night. And the ducks, of course. You teach me something every time we're together." The human winked, and Garnaak wondered if there was more than appeared there. Sydney continued, "You are amazing, and I get to have martinis made by the best Xtro bartender on Earth." Even though the term made him uncomfortable, Garnaak made a genuine clicking that translated to a warm chuckle. "No, the only one." "True. Who'd have thought it? So, then, neighbour, let me ask you, how was your day? Don't leave me hanging." Garnaak moved his massive, tree-trunk-sized legs and rested one of his 3 arms on the balcony rail. "Ah, my day. Well, I mediated another ongoing dispute between 2 of your planetary factions. Entertaining, really. So much emotional investment over such trivial details." Sounds like a Tuesday, Sydney joked, taking another sip. Who was it this time? Nations fighting over resources? Political arguments? Corporate intrigue? Hostile takeover? Garnaak shuttered all three eyes, considering how best to explain the interplanetary view of planet-side relations without overwhelming his neighbor. Yes, something like that. Humans seem to become entangled in minor disputes, yet your capacity for bonding remains intriguing, like the ducks. Sydney raised an eyebrow. You're still stuck on them, huh? And bonding, huh? What's that about? Always the philosopher? He motioned toward the lake, where the two ducks had just arrived for a sunset swim. One of Garnaak's eyes followed, and he spied his favourite pair, even more so than the cormorants, herons, egrets, ibis, and occasional anhinga. The two ladies glided across the water, traversing from the far corner of the small lake to pass the nearer shore, where Garnaak and Sydney perched, high above on the condo balcony. Always together, constantly foraging, swimming, exploring, and quacking in duet. Never a dispute, never a question of what next. Each somehow knew what the other was doing, thinking, and planning. Garnaak's thoughts whirred. They simplify living. No distractions. They move as one, requiring no words, no deliberation, just being. Sydney chuckled. Maybe they've got it all figured out. No need for martinis and pleasantries about how was your day. Garnaak winked. Perhaps, but I find martinis to be an essential part of earthly rituals. Sydney stood, stretching as the ocean breeze faded. The sun was down, painting the cloud tops in orange and purple. The two ladies paddled to the edge, ripples disappearing from the calm water. Sydney glanced at his wrist. Well, Garnaak? Pausing, sucking air through his teeth, knowing he was butchering the pronunciation. That's it for me tonight. Early morning tomorrow. Garnaak studied Sydney, each eye reflecting the soft glow of the twilight, his many limbs still and composed. He let out a slight hum that the translator missed but passed along. Thank you for sitting with me, Sydney. Rest well. Sydney said, You too, Ambassador. Garnaak didn't turn as Sydney exited through the balcony door and left the condo, not worrying whether Sydney could find his way out. The spoken title lingered in the air. Garnaak felt a pang of discomfort. Ambassador. An echo of an idea that wasn't entirely accurate. An anthropomorphism at best. Humans were trying to find a label for the role of Garnaak and his fellow spacefarers. He wasn't an ambassador. He wasn't there to negotiate, bring gifts, make treaties, or deliver knowledge. Instead, it was more straightforward, like a distant relative visiting to offer unsolicited advice but never intervening. The rumble of rocket exhaust vibrated the balcony doors, heralding another launch. Garnaak flicked his eyes up to catch the torch-like glare and vapor trail, the continuing cadence of humans trying to expand beyond the Earth. Even as the smoke dissolved into the dusk, Garnaak knew there would be more tonight. There were always more launches. Like clockwork, each one a small act of defiance against the constraints of gravity. They are trying so hard, but they are still limited by their reach, limited by their capabilities, he mused. They're just not ready yet. They're persistent 10 times as often as when I arrived. So many attempts and a few nasty failures. Hoping and waiting for the day they'd find a better solution, knowing we have it and won't give it to them. Yet even though they know their tech is not the answer, they continue. They always continue. He let his eyes drift back to the lake where the two ladies were resting at the shoreline. Their bond, so simple, so natural, was a far cry from humanity's aspirations. They did not seek to reach the stars. They lived within their means, bound by the cycles of the earth, unburdened by dreams of what lay beyond the horizon. Garnaak felt a strange cognitive dissonance, an odd kinship with them. He too was bound, though not by nature, but by his purpose. He and the other space travelers had been deployed to Earth and dropped off unceremoniously, their great interstellar vessel waving goodbye as it departed for another system. Deliberately introduced to the humans as techless, they were left on assignment bereft of any knowledge that could tip the scales too early, too irresponsibly. They were there to help, but never to interfere. There is much we could teach you, Garnaak thought, but that would rob you of your path. You must grow into the stars, not be pulled there. In a way, it was a role as old as the ducks on the lake. A quiet life, fostering and letting it grow in its own time and way. Garnaak knew that humans needed to make their own mistakes. Their crude rockets would one day pierce the stars, but it would not be due to any intervention from him or other spacefaring races. He scanned the dark sky, with stars hardly visible from the bright beacons of the port. The Earth's solo moon was rising, a silvery reflection on the water. His mind wandered back to the ducks, now nestled somewhere in the dark, their connection an unspoken reassurance. They did not need rockets, technology, or progress. Their world was complete. The night deepened, and Garnaak remained on the balcony, listening to the gentle sounds of the lake below and the distant echoes of humanity's ongoing quest to leave Earth behind. Chapter 3. Weeks faded into months. Seasons passed, and Garnaak continued his routines, sitting on the balcony in the evenings as often as business would allow. There was constancy in the peaceful setting, watching the still waters reflecting the darkening skies. The landscape remained unchanged from season to season, palm fronds rustling in the breeze and the lake's surface calm. But he noticed that his internal landscape had evolved. The ducks, his ever-present companions in observation, moved in their predictable patterns across the lake, and Garnaak found himself drawn deeper into their world with each passing day. Some evenings were not his own. On occasion, as Garnaak sat on the balcony, his reverie would be interrupted by the familiar vibrating of an incoming call. The gentle rattling against the tabletop reminded him that his business responsibilities were spread around this globe of Earth and that time zones were an inconvenience. He picked up his pad and, with one claw covered in a capacitive finger glove, he tapped the screen to accept. The video revealed an Earth official, Ms. Adriana Brookstone. She was one of his most frequent contacts among Earth bureaucrats, even though she lived and worked halfway around the planet. The image was bright in the dim light of the balcony. "Garnaak, good evening," she began, though the hour was far from evening in her part of the world. "Hope I'm not interrupting your ritual?" Garnaak was pleased that she made the effort to vocalize his name almost correctly. Few humans could come close. "Ah, Miss Brookstone, not at all," he replied through his translator. "How can I assist?" Adriana's face was stoic and unrevealing, but her tone spoke otherwise. Garnaak had learned enough from all the human video stories to infer urgency. He riveted all eyes on her screen image. "The desert. Once again. Same old things, and they won't listen. We've got a developing situation with unrest, resources, and boundaries violated. I'd like your help moderating. The usual. I know it's a challenge traveling that far, but we'll send an airplane for you. These folks have a lot of impact. They control vast amounts of resources. But more importantly, their beliefs spread far beyond their own borders to like-minded folks around the globe." Garnaak narrowed all three eyes, suppressing an urge to voice frustration. Humans and their disputes were always about resources, territory, and fleeting power struggles. He offered his analysis, suggesting strategies based on his observations of human behavior, though part of his mind remained elsewhere, wondering about the two ladies swimming in the distance. As the conversation continued, one eye drifted back to the two ducks, sliding through the water. Their idyll was unaffected by human preoccupations. How could such simplicity exist alongside such convoluted machinations, he wondered. Who's happier? The ducks in their mundane routine, or the humans in all their glory? He felt confident that the ducks had no doubt of the answer, and he was equally positive that the humans didn't regard it as a relevant question. "I'll be ready. I'm sure we can encourage them to let go and move forward." Garnaak waited and watched as Ms. Brookstone confirmed without comment, ending the call. The pad blackened, leaving him in the balcony's stillness. Just as he settled back into the evening, another call popped up, this one from a fellow spacefarer, Tarek. He was a great addition to the team from a race far younger than Garnaak's. His reptilian expression bore the relaxed look of a creature that had woken up from a long, healthy rest. "Ah, Garnaak, I see you're in your favorite spot." Tarek attempted an almost human smile, the folds of his face pulling back in a gesture his species used as a smile. Garnaak was pretty sure humans found the triple rows of incisors disturbing, like Tarek was preparing to shred and devour them straight out of their worst nightmares, but he never told Tarek that. Tarek was peering through the video at the lake backdrop behind Garnaak. "I've got Shibuya Crossing outside my window and thousands of humans rushing about all the time, night and day. But you've got that serene little patch of water." Garnaak would have groused at the mispronunciation of his name, but it would be to no avail. He gestured toward the lake, where the two ducks were still paddling. "Indeed, this has become a centerpiece of my regimen, observing these two. There is something remarkable here. I have studied at length. This species pair bonds for life, not like us, not like you." Tarek raised an eyebrow. "The ducks? Are you still watching them? What's so unusual about that? They don't survive as long as we do they?" Garnaak's hue blued in what passed for a bemused smile. "I'm not sure yet. It may seem trivial, but I find their clarity of purpose captivating. Their relationship requires no dialogue, no intricate arbitration, just tranquil companionship. They spend every minute of every day and every night together. But from what I have learned, they are not even a mating pair. No offspring, just loyalty to one another." "Silent companionship?" Tarek chuckled. "Sounds like you're getting soft, Garnaak. Have the humans started rubbing off on you?" Garnaak's gaze returned to the water. I believe there is something to be learned from all of them. I am starting to recognize it as a characteristic of all of the species here, Tarek. Humans, despite their constant disputes, form associations that are enduring. These ducks, too. I am beginning to grasp why our earlier teams said it was time. Tarek leaned back, crossing his arms. For a member of one of the recently uplifted races, he often provided startling, accurate insights. You know, I had a similar thought. I've been helping with a trade negotiation between some very onerous parties. They argued for weeks over tiny details, and then, one day, I suggested a slight variation, no compromise for either side, just a thread they had missed, and that was all it took. At the end of it, they shared a meal. It was as if none of the tension mattered, as if the dispute had never occurred. Garnaak glanced at the screen and then back at the lake, watching as the ladies continued their evening traversal. They do have a way of returning to each other, even after conflict, helping to rebuild that which they willfully destroyed. Tarek laughed again. Perhaps we're overthinking things. After all, we're not here to solve their problems, just to watch, maybe ask them to think about things, but to let them grow at their own pace, much like those ducks of yours. Garnaak's translator relayed a softened tone. Yes, but it's difficult not to be drawn into their convoluted behavior. I appreciate the patience of these ducks. They seem to understand why we have waited so long to be here now. Sounds like you're learning more from them than the humans, Tarek teased. Perhaps, Garnaak admitted, or perhaps they are one and the same, two parts of the same lesson. Tarek darted out a length of tongue, then checked the time. Well, I've got another call in a few minutes. Just wanted to check in. Don't get too attached to your feathered friends, Garnaak. You might start thinking like a human. Garnaak retorted with an untranslated sprack as he ended the call, leaving him alone. He knew what Tarek's other call would be, and he was glad. Adriana Brookstone had a keen way of deciding which spacefarers should be paired on missions. She had learned that Tarek and Garnaak made a formidable team when sent in for moderation. He gazed down, spying the ducks as they finished their unhurried swim, as they always did. There was no rush, no urgency in their movements, unlike the constant stream of calls and demands that seemed to fill his days. Each evening had a familiar rhythm, conversations about politics, negotiations, and the ongoing conflicts of the human world. But always there was a return to this quiet place, these ducks, and their peaceful lifestyle. Garnaak found solace in the routine. The days blurred together, not in monotony, but in a sense of continuity. Humans would launch their rockets, argue over resources, and call upon him for advice, yet the ducks remained as they were, an anchor in the ever-moving currents of time. Chapter 4. The sun was setting as Garnaak climbed down from the flatbed truck's rear. Any other might have been indignant at the travel inconvenience, but for Garnaak it was just part of the job. His bulk and massive tripod legs didn't marry well with human transportation. Cargo aircraft from the Cape to a local landing strip, then a truck to the meeting site. It seemed anachronistic, like something straight out of one of their old video stories. The barren landscape stretched in every direction, windswept and treeless. Garnaak squinted in the harsh sunlight, scanning for details of the remote site, a place where centuries of rivalries had led to today's discussion. As usual, it had been a long trip to get there. Halfway around the planet, more than a day's travel time. No time to rest. In, listen, talk, and out. That was their mission. Tarek was already waiting, his sinewy bipedal form unmistakable even from a distance. As they greeted one another, Garnaak's translator caught the soft clicking of Tarek's amusement. "Ah, Garnaak! I thought you'd arrive sooner, but I see you were enjoying Earth's luxury travel options," Tarek teased, the folds of flesh pulling back around his ears, razor-sharp teeth sparkling in the sun. "The vagaries of their transport systems never cease to amuse me," Garnaak replied, flickering his hue to acknowledge the jest. They stood together, surveying the bevy of expensive human toys scattered near the makeshift negotiating tents. The motor vehicles were ill-suited for this harsh climate, but were important symbols for humans. A score of humans would be awaiting their arrival, and the air felt heavy with tension. Yet, as Garnaak took in the scene, he was once again struck by the paradox of humanity's tiny, fragile factions and the vastness of the universe beyond their doorstep. "What's the status?" Garnaak asked, shifting his attention to the task at hand. Tarek's eyes narrowed, lips sheathing his teeth. Both sides claim historical rights to the land. Resources are dwindling, and accusations of sabotage have escalated. But what's at play here is fear. Fear of losing what little they believe belongs to them. And that fear is stoked by misinformation, that in fact we're here to take it all away. Garnaak bobbed his whole being, 3 arms wrapping around to clasp his claws in thought. They see themselves as isolated, unique in their grievances, when, in truth, they need to realize we are awaiting them to join us, to expand across the galaxy. "Exactly," Tarek agreed, "but they don't seem to grasp that. Too much inbred distrust, suspicion, and betrayal. Perhaps we can open their eyes today, if only a little." As Garnaak and Tarek approached the largest tent, the murmur of conversation inside faded. The silence that enveloped them wasn't a lack of sound. It was ponderous, like the very air had thickened, pressing down from above. It felt as though every breath was being held, every word swallowed, as the humans' attention snapped to the 2 spacefarers. When they stooped through the flaps to enter the tent, all eyes locked on them, wide with wonderment and trepidation. Garnaak nictated his 3 eyes in sequence, adjusting to the dark, scrutinizing the anxious humans. His translator hummed to him, picking up the whispered words from someone closest to the entrance. "I didn't think they were real," one murmured, his voice barely audible. "We've been fooled before, so many times. I've never seen one in person. I heard they smell bad. They're bigger than I imagined," a woman whispered in awe, her eyes fixed on Tarek. Another, farther back, muttered, "They can read your mind. Watch out." "They eat pets," someone added in a low, uneasy voice. "They should go back where they came from," muttered another. Tarek nodded to Garnaak, conceding that he'd heard the comments too. They were both used to this reaction. After all, their existence was often more myth than reality in the minds of many. Not enough of the spacefarers to go around, so most humans would never encounter one in person. Humans had fed themselves with so many imaginary stories of encounters over the generations, horrific battles of aliens and predators coming to exterminate life on Earth. Many believed this was just another example of those in power, or vying for power, to blind the masses with fear. The surprise and quiet astonishment were predictable, yet it never failed to remind Garnaak of the vast gap between perception and reality, misinformation and truth. The human leaders squirmed in their seats, their expressions betraying curiosity, suspicion, and apprehension. Garnaak knew that they were grappling not just with the dispute at hand, but with the physical truth of the two Xtros standing before them. Creatures of legend made real. Two elders rose, one from each side, and came forward to greet Tarek and Garnaak. They stood as tall as they could, not looking at each other, not even reaching 2/3 the height of the Xtros. The one with the longest grey beard spoke first. "I apologize for our accommodations. I am afraid we have nothing for you to sit upon." The other added, "We prepared for your visit, but we didn't know how," hesitating, "large you were." Tarek eased the tension. "We are honoured to be invited and need no accommodation. We would like to listen. If it pleases you, we will remain standing right here." The two elders nodded and returned to their respective sides, never acknowledging each other. The discussions that ensued were restrained, each side holding back in the presence of the outsiders. But after a few fiery accusations and insults from one side to the other, the Xtros were forgotten, and heated arguments and shouting filled the air. The cacophony would have been overwhelming, but Tarek and Garnaak's translators suppressed much of the aggravated tonal anger and summarized the content for each. Hours passed, and the two Xtros remained stationary, statues in silence. Chapter 5. Late in the evening, the elder, who had spoken first in welcoming Tarek and Garnaak, threw his hands up in silence, shaking his head. "We go nowhere. Why do we even try?" There were mumbles of frustration throughout the tent. It was time. With slow, deliberate movements, Garnaak unclasped his claws, lowered his appendages to dangle at his three sides, and shuffled between the opposing tables to the tent's centre. The two human delegations glared across from each other, their postures rigid, hands clenched on the tabletops, watching him, tracking his every movement. He allowed them a moment to process the enormity of the situation, the dichotomy of his standing so amicably before them versus their petty skirmishes, the horrific myths debunked versus their mundane arguments. His translator clicked on, delivering his words in a calm, even tone. "You are gathered here to resolve a dispute," Garnaak began, his gaze sweeping the tent, taking time to catch every delegate with direct eye contact. "A dispute that, from your perspective, feels monumental. But let me ask you here and now, when you resolve it, today, tomorrow, next year, or maybe never, will it ripple across the vastness of the universe and make a difference? When you are long gone, but your children are out among the stars, will these squabbles matter to them? Will this be all that you want them to remember of you and Earth?" The room remained still, the silence now filled with an even heavier expectation. The human leaders exchanged glances, uncertainty colouring their faces. Garnaak could sense their inner conflict, years, even centuries of entrenched positions struggling to align with the new reality they now faced. It wasn't just the revelation that Garnaak, Tarek, and all the other spacefarers were real that was changing their world. Dawning on them was the burden of the truth of how wrong they had been. In their lifetime, they never imagined how much their future would mutate. A few might even recognize the possibilities ahead of them. One of the human leaders, a grizzled man with dark circles around deep-set eyes, leaned forward, his face hardened with the angst of their past. "You expect us just to forget our legacy, to abandon what we've fought for, what's been passed down through generations?" Garnaak blinked, his gaze never wavering. "No, I do not ask you to forget your history. We sing ours to each new generation to keep it alive. You are all that has come before, which is good. I ask you to consider it in a broader context. What does the future you are struggling with look like? Is it one of continued division, endless provocation and retaliation? Or can you imagine something greater? Can you build something that will endure, not because of what you have taken, but because of what you create together? We are out there, millions of species, each of us as different as Tarek and me, and we are all waiting for you to join us." Garnaak watched as the man struggled with his thoughts, the tension in his face betraying the pull between his desire to protect his people and the import of Garnaak's message. The man's knuckles whitened as he gripped the table's edge, the words heavy on his lips. "Our history is all we have left." His eyes hardened as he spoke, his grip tightening as if he would rip off the tabletop. He glanced toward the other leaders, his jaw clenched, bracing himself for their judgment. Tradition was their mantra, but Garnaak could see the glimmer of doubt forming, the internal conflict between holding on to the past and embracing an uncertain future. "We do understand. Your planet is among so many that we have lost count, and your species is one of the many that we implore to join us. While important to you now, your struggles are not unique, and those struggles can be forgotten as you reach the stars. Disputing resources, territory, and identity, these are challenges faced by civilizations across the universe. It is not a perfect galaxy. Some destroyed themselves along the way over principles, but by far the majority have found ways to transcend them. The universe is boundless, and there is so much more to share." Tarek chimed in, his voice low and resonant, expanding on Garnaak's words. "Look upon us. We too are from different civilizations, different species and different worlds with different histories. Our peoples met long ago, and could well have eyed each other with suspicion, even hostility. But when faced with the infinite expanse of the cosmos, we came to realize that our differences were insignificant. The universe is too vast for us to remain small-minded." Another leader, much younger, with sharp eyes and a confident posture, leaned in. "You talk of the stars, but we're down here, dealing with real problems. How do we reconcile those two? Why not just assist us now? Give us the tech we need, help us build a starship?" Garnaak slightly inclined his torso, as if leaning into a bow, his translator delivering the response respectfully. "The stars are not separate from your reality. They are part of the same continuum. You must learn to navigate both, your world and the vastness beyond. If you cannot find peace here, how can you hope to thrive when you reach beyond your own skies? It is not our place to give it to you. It is a place for you to aspire to obtain together." For a brief moment, Garnaak allowed himself an internal reflection. He had been here before, with other species, other worlds, other missions. There was always a moment when they teetered between conflict and growth. And though this time felt no different in its uncertain outcome, he sensed something within these humans, a willingness to question themselves, to reconsider their path. Even in their discord, Garnaak sensed a deep connection between the humans. It reminded him of the two ladies, circling the lake together, unaware of their perfect harmony. Did the humans realize they were bound together in the same instinctive dance? Perhaps, like the ducks, they could find peace without ever knowing it was within them all along. Let the complexities become simple. The stress in the room began to dissipate, a subtle softening as the implications of Garnaak and Tarek's words settled in. Garnaak hoped that the humans, once so focused on their immediate grievances, would now confront a new perspective, one that placed their issues in the context of the infinite. Tarek signaled Garnaak that their message had landed. The two thanked the leadership on both sides of the tent for allowing them to visit, then moved to the exit, their manner commanding yet gentle. Garnaak could hear the buzz of possibility in the air, a tentative willingness to consider a future beyond the self-defined demarcations that had so long defined them. He also perceived the humans' confusion, unused to a meeting with no demands, no threats, just the offer of growth. That, in itself, would cause them to reflect, reconsider, and perhaps evolve. As they left the tent, wandering away in the dark, Tarek turned to Garnaak and commented, "It's always remarkable, isn't it? The way they react when they realize they're not alone in the universe and that we want them to join us. Not to kill them and eat them, and that we don't want anything except for them to do it together." Garnaak fluted his gillicles and cycled his hue, the best he could do to emulate a smile. His translator expressed the ripple of satisfaction passing through him, vocalizing in Tarek's own tongue, "It is the first step toward understanding their place in something far greater." Tarek nodded and answered in kind. And the first step toward realizing that their differences, while important, are not insurmountable. They moved along, side by side, two alien spacefarers from different worlds, yet united in their understanding of the infinity beyond. The humans, left behind in the tent, would take time to process the encounter, but would be forever changed. Garnaak knew this was his job, and if he could feel the equivalent of a human sense of pride, he would have. It always made him feel a bit better when the universe came into focus. It would be a long ride back to the Cape, by truck, and then the long, long cargo plane flight. But Garnaak knew the trip was worth the inconvenience. Chapter 6. Garnaak settled on the balcony, his three legs shifting as he contorted his shape on the curved stool. The evening air was cooler than usual, a sign that Earth's seasons were turning again, and it was a welcome respite from the blazing heat of the desert from his recent trip. His drink, an odd fusion of earth ingredients and a fermented fruit trying to emulate something from his home, sat untouched beside him as he watched the lake below. The water rippled in the breeze, and there, like clockwork, were the two ladies. They glided in unison across the lake, their feathers shimmering in the fading light. Garnaak blinked his three eyes in slow succession, focusing on their movements. For years now, he had watched them, always together, always moving in quiet precision. When one stopped to duck its head into the water for a snack, the other turned and waited. If one got out on the shore to explore, the other paddled back and forth close by, watching. "Fascinating," Garnaak muttered, his translator not bothering to output the thought. The ducks were not bound by treaties, negotiations, or the need for constant validation that dominated his work with the humans. They simply were. Side by side, no matter the weather or the time of day or the seasons. Even now, as the air turned crisp and the darkness fell earlier, the two ladies remained constant. He remembered Sydney's off-handed comment, "Maybe they've figured it all out." No need for martinis and pleasantries about "how was your day?" At the time, Garnaak had been amused, humans, always simplifying things. But the more he watched the ducks, the more Sydney's words seemed to carry a significance he hadn't considered. Garnaak swiveled on the stool, turning one eye back toward his untouched drink. Perhaps there was something to learn from simplicity, something the humans had stumbled upon without even realizing it. His kind were always overthinking, over-analyzing, and ready to suggest and advise. Here he was, observing ducks like they were part of some grand diplomatic mission. He scolded himself, a low clicking sound. It was a pleasant diversion, of course. It was a far cry from the endless divergences between earthlings. Ducks had yet to ask for mediation. As he watched them float effortlessly across the water, Garnaak let his thoughts drift homeward, decades away. There, relationships were far more transactional. Bonds were made, broken, and reformed, all according to purpose and efficiency. Emotions, as described by humans, seldom clutter life. And yet, the ducks seemed to operate on a different set of rules. They weren't building alliances and had no end goal or task to complete together. Just neighbours, Garnaak thought, recalling his arrangement with Sydney. No obligations, no expectations, just the quiet ritual of two beings in proximity, coexisting without complication. But was that all there was to it? Garnaak's third eye blinked twice in rapid succession as he watched one of the ducks dive under the surface, emerging moments later with some morsel of food. The other followed suit, diving just a few feet away. Always in harmony, always together. It reminded him of the way humans seem to cling to each other through wars, disputes, and even time. His fellow spacefarers often found human interactions erratic. Yet Garnaak was starting to see the appeal, even a pattern. The ducks, after all, were living proof that such bonds could exist in an authentic, unsophisticated form. He leaned back, letting his 3 arms and 3 legs relax as he continued to observe. The air was growing colder, and soon the sun would dip below the horizon, casting long shadows over the lake. The two would depart for the night, as they always did, leaving him alone on the balcony with his thoughts. As if on cue, the door behind him slid open, and Sydney stepped out, his figure silhouetted against the dim light inside. "Garnaak, how's our favourite pair tonight?" Sydney asked, strolling to the balcony rail with a practised ease. "They are consistent, as always," Garnaak replied, his translator smoothing out the odd pauses between words. He swiveled one eye towards Sydney, while the others stayed focused on the lake. "Their routine does not change." "Lucky them," Sydney chuckled, pulling a jacket tighter around himself. "Sometimes I think I'd trade my job for their life. No bills, no deadlines, just swim, eat, repeat." Garnaak considered that for a moment. Do humans envy such simplicity? Sydney shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe. Or maybe we just like to romanticize it. Makes us feel better when life gets too torturous." Garnaak blinked, concentrating on the ducks. Was that what he was doing? Romanticizing their very being? His thoughts had indeed drifted in that direction, but it wasn't just that. The ducks embodied something more profound, something he struggled to grasp. Sydney stretched, glancing at his watch. "Well, I'm off. Early meeting tomorrow. Enjoy your ducks, Garnaak. By the way, I just stopped by for a moment to tell you that my daughter, Marcia, is coming over tomorrow with my granddaughter. They were wondering if you would mind, and, well, they've never met one of you in person." Garnaak turned his full attention to Sydney. This was something new. Garnaak appreciated that his neighbour trusted him enough to ask about it. He bobbed as best he could, and his translator described the bow. "Sydney, thank you for asking. I would be delighted. I also have never met one, a tiny one of your kind, before. It will be an exciting experience, I am sure." "Well, I hope it's not exciting. They'll stop by tomorrow afternoon after work. We'll wave to you from down there. Maybe you can join us for a walk around the lake." Garnaak's translator relayed his enthusiasm. "Oh, yes, let's do that. They can meet our two ladies." Garnaak remained perched as Sydney disappeared, leaving the balcony to head back through the condo to his own unit. The balcony door slid shut, leaving the quiet sounds of the lake. The ducks were nearing the shore now, their evening routine complete. Soon they would vanish into the dark, and the lake would return to its still, glassy state. Garnaak blinked, watching the water settle as the ducks disappeared from view. He felt a strange pang in his chest, something that wasn't quite an emotion, but close. It was as if, in their simple, repetitive lives, the ducks had unlocked a truth that had eluded him for so long. Maybe simplicity made life meaningful. Maybe, just maybe, the ducks had it all figured out. Chapter 7. The late afternoon air was cool from the ocean breeze, the sun in and out behind clouds. Garnaak was startled out of his reverie by voices shouted up from the parking lot below. "Garnaak! Yoo-hoo!" Garnaak slipped back from staring absently at the ducks paddling in circles around the lake. He looked down at the lot and spied Sydney. Beside his neighbour stood a woman, who Garnaak assumed must be his daughter, and a small figure waving enthusiastically between them. "Garnie!" Sydney shouted. "Come on down! We're here!" Garnaak's translator hummed as he analysed their tone, friendly, expectant. The little one broke away from her mother and stepped to the edge of the concrete, looking up. "Garnaak!" she called out, her voice small but precise. The pronunciation was flawless, no hesitation, no misstep. It was the first time any human had said his name correctly. Garnaak's hue betrayed subtle surprise, but inwardly he was quite pleased. "One moment," he chirped, and his translator broadcast it loud enough to carry down to the humans waiting below. "I will join you." He stood, massive limbs unfolding as he adjusted his stance and stooped inside through the balcony door. He made his way out from his unit to the elevator and waited, moving with the smooth, purposeful gait he had learned on Earth to avoid breaking things. The human condos were designed for shorter and less massive beings than him, but he was happy enough living there that it didn't matter. By the time he reached the first floor and the parking lot, the young one was waiting at the edge, hands on her hips, looking at him wide-eyed. Sydney and his daughter stood a few feet behind. Sydney's daughter's expression mixed between awe and warmth, but the little girl showed no sign of hesitancy. As soon as Garnaak stepped onto the pavement, she approached him, studying him carefully, neck craning backward to let her stare up at his towering height. She walked all the way around Garnaak and then asked, "Which side is your front?" Her head tilted with genuine interest. Her mother made a startled sound as if to say something, but Sydney just chuckled. Garnaak rippled all three eyes in succession, something akin to amusement coursing through his being. "Which would you like it to be?" Garnaak rotated in front of the tiny child, each of his eyes winking at her in turn. Typically, humans talk to this side, where my translator is, he said, pointing with one prehensile claw to the electronic brooch pinned on his outer garment. The girl child nodded as though the answer made perfect sense, and without a second thought, she reached up and took the gloved digit of one of his three-fingered claws in her tiny hand. "Okay," she said. "My name is Lily. We're going for a walk. Come on, Mum, we're going to see the ducks." Her mother, still somewhat in awe, gave Sydney a look, but he just grinned. "It's fine," he said. "Marcia, they'll be fine." Sydney stood there and nodded approval for Lily to leave. Her mother started reaching out, but Sydney raised a hand and urged her to stay back. Garnaak glanced at Sydney and his daughter, offering what he hoped was a reassuring gesture, a slow, deliberate bow. "We will not go far," his translator chimed, though Lily was already tugging him toward the lake. Garnaak allowed himself to be led. His long legs slowed to the pace of the child's determined strides. They walked silently, the lake's surface shimmering in the fading light. Still holding his claw, Lily looked up at him and smiled. "Do you have kids where you come from?" she asked, her voice filled with guileless curiosity. Garnaak blinked, the question taking him by surprise. "No," he answered slowly. "We are raised differently. In creches." "Creches?" Lily frowned. "What's that?" "A place where young ones are cared for by many raisers." "Oh." She mulled this over, then asked, "So you don't have a mum or dad?" "No," Garnaak said. "Not in the way humans do. We're trinary. One of us is the originator, one the carrier, and one the raiser. Raisers work together in the creche." Lily nodded, as if that too made sense in her world. They reached the lake's edge, and she released his claw, plopping herself down on the bank, her legs crossed. Garnaak hesitated, then lowered himself beside her, his three legs bending, folding him like a compressed tripod. Even as low as he could get, he still towered over her. She stared upward at his three eyes, still studying him, curious but unafraid. "How old are you?" Garnaak mulled a bit and chirped to his translator. It paused and then relayed, "Over 200 years, it said, converting to an Earth relative number that seemed almost unreal. Lily's eyes widened, impressed. "Wow, that's a lot. Will you ever die?" "Someday. We don't get old, but we decide we've had enough and we—" The translator stopped, silent, unable to handle the sprack. Lily seemed to understand anyway. "My dad died when I was just a kid. He was a soldier, I think." Garnaak wondered at the age dissonance, but only said, "I am sorry for your loss." "Oh, it's okay. I don't remember him much. It was a long time ago. Mum says he was doing what he believed in. Flying. Testing stuff. Rockets. She still cries, though. I hear her sometimes when I am supposed to be sleeping." They both turned their attention to the lake as the ducks, the two ladies, swam nearby, their gentle quacks echoing across the water. They moved as one, heads dipping below the surface, tails sticking straight up in the air as they foraged for food at the bottom. Lily giggled, pointing. "They're doing the thing," she exclaimed. "Look, they're bottoms up." Garnaak blinked in amusement, observing the ducks with a new appreciation. "Yes," he said. They do this often. Lily leaned forward, resting her chin in her hands as she watched the ducks.
Do you have ducks where you come from?
No, Garnaak replied. No creatures quite like them. She nodded thoughtfully.
Do you have war where you come from?
Garnaak paused, the non sequitur catching him off guard. The question was surprising, though Lily had asked it with all the seriousness of a child simply wanting the truth. No, he said. We do not have war.
Why do humans fight so much? Gramps says that's why you're here, to help us stop.
Lily asked, turning to look at him, her face solemn. Garnaak blinked, unsure how to answer. Perhaps Sydney knew more about Garnaak than he let on. Humans are complex, he said. They often struggle with differences, but they are also capable of great kindness, and the bonds humans form are unique among the galaxy's dominions. Lily sighed, watching the ducks.
I wish people didn't fight. The ducks don't fight.
No, Garnaak agreed. They do not. They sat silently, watching as the two ladies continued their peaceful routine. Lily, ever curious, asked more questions about Garnaak's home, his world, what he ate, and whether he missed anyone. Each question was asked with a child's naive nosiness, but Garnaak could sense the more profound substance behind them, as if Lily, despite her age, was searching for some meaning she couldn't quite grasp. Eventually, Lily lay back on the grass, looking up at the almost twilight sky, and Garnaak adjusted his posture, settling comfortably beside her.
Can we see your planet?
Garnaak squinted and thought about the time of year. No, my sun is the other way. If you could see through your own sun in the morning, it's way out in that direction. Next summer, though, if you stop by again, I'll point it out to you when it is high in the sky. Lily nodded. I hope I can. Mum says her company is moving us to their headquarters out west. That's why we came to see Gramps tonight. He talks about you all the time, and Mom wanted to see you for herself. Oh, was all Garnaak could say. What did that mean? Was Sydney talking about him all the time? He wondered about it. To whom? Garnaak wasn't sure what to make of that. It was a shame that the little human would be moving away. Garnaak felt an unusual kinship with her. But humans always seemed to be on the move, looking for something over the next hill beyond the horizon. It would serve them well when they expanded into the galaxy. Lily stood up and brushed the grass clippings from her pants, hearing her mother calling from the parking lot. It was almost dark. Garnaak got up beside her. She pointed to the two ducks. Do you think they are happy? She asked quietly. Garnaak blinked, his eyes shifting from the ducks to the horizon and back to Lily. I believe, he said, that they are content. Lily smiled, satisfied with the answer. I think so too. As the last of the sun on the cloud tops disappeared and the ducks paddled away, Garnaak led Lily back to her waiting mother and grandfather, feeling ever more hopeful for humanity. Chapter 8. Another long trip, more days away on the other side of the world, once again face to face with human officials. Now, finally, back, the familiar sights and sounds gave Garnaak great pleasure. He couldn't want anything more. His routine had become years of doing and repeating, and he was okay with that.
He settled onto his balcony stool, limbs stretching in quiet satisfaction as the evening breeze rolled off the lake. Sydney had called and said he was also back from a long trip. How about if he mixed some drinks and came over? It would be a welcome diversion, and Garnaak was intrigued by which libation Sydney would conjure. As usual, Sydney entered Garnaak's condo without ringing, which was okay with Garnaak. Sydney slid open the balcony door and stepped out, carrying 2 glasses with little paper umbrellas. He grinned as he approached the railing. "Back in one piece, I see," Sydney said lightly, handing Garnaak one. Garnaak accepted, gently taking the glass with 3 digits, looking through it and examining the sunset colours of the drink. He fluted his gills and inhaled the waft of a sweet earth fruit. Pineapple, they called it, although from his investigation it was neither from a pine tree nor an apple. Humans, indeed, had strange ways of labelling things in their world. Indeed, it is good to return to the constancy of these trappings. If Sydney was bothered by the translator's expression or particular choice of phrasing, he didn't show it. They stood silently, watching the afternoon thunderstorm clouds reflect on the lake. Sydney sipped his drink, then glanced sideways at Garnaak, his smile tightening. Marcia asked me to apologise for Lily for the visit last week," Sydney began, scratching the back of his neck. "She can be a bit intense with her questions. You'd think she was 20 years older than she is. I didn't think she'd bombard you like that. You and I haven't had a chance to speak since then." Garnaak turned one eye toward Sydney, not quite squinting, chittering sincerity through his translator. "There is no need to apologise. I found her questions refreshing. Children often see the world with a clarity that adults sometimes lose." Sydney cackled, though there was a trace of something else behind his laughter. "Yeah, well, she's definitely got a way of cutting right to the heart of things. Takes after her mother." "I was honoured to spend time with her, Sydney, and I look forward to seeing her again." "Sure, thanks. You made quite an impression on her. She's been going on and on about your chat and studying everything she can." Sydney leaned on the railing as he glanced out over the water. "I bet you really enjoy your time up here on the balcony. Every one of your workdays is filled with our troubles, and Lord knows, Earth bureaucrats can be exhausting. Too many egos, too many agendas. But at the end of it all, you come back here and have this escape." He swirled his drink and shot Garnaak a sidelong glance. "I'm sure it's not quite like what you're used to." Garnaak flicked 2 eyes in Sydney's direction, the other one still tracking a distant ripple on the lake. "Every species has its complexities. Humans are no exception." Sydney tilted his head, then sipped his drink. "You know, I was thinking about what Lily asked you the other day. She's sharp for her age, picks up on things even I miss sometimes." Garnaak remained still, his translator humming. He had been surprised by Lily's insight. Her directness was welcome compared to the embellishment and obfuscation he often encountered. "She had a lot of good questions," Sydney continued. "Made me wonder a few things too, honestly." He smiled, but there was a glimmer of something in his eyes. Curiosity, but not the innocent kind Lily had shown. "What sort of things?" Garnaak asked, his translator very carefully keeping the tone neutral. Sydney shrugged, taking another slow sip of his drink. "Oh, just little things. Like how you seem to know so much about humans already. You blend in well, you know. Almost too well. For first contact, that is." He chuckled, as if he were sharing an inside joke. Garnaak blinked again, this time swivelling all eyes toward Sydney. "I have studied Earth for a long time," he said, careful to keep his response measured. It is part of my role here. And we've been here many, many times. Not me personally, of course, long before I was gestated. Really? Sydney asked. Makes sense. There have always been stories of aliens among us, going back thousands of years. But don't you ever wonder why we don't ask more questions about you? I mean, I know you're here to observe and all, but if the shoe were on the other foot, I think humans would be a lot more inquisitive. Garnaak noted the change in tone. It wasn't an accusation, but something was behind the nonchalant words. Curiosity is natural, Garnaak said, his translator smoothing out the pauses. When we came here on this mission, we knew this would be a trip where we would begin living among you. All previous visits had been in and out. Quickly look where you were on the ladder. Limited contact. Nothing permanent. Garnaak considered before responding. How much should he say? Everything? There was no reason to hold back, regardless of Sydney's purpose. He went on. But the most recent reports from the last century told us it was time. So a different sort of us were sent, like me. Not explorers, not tech, not engineers, just communication skills. We've been through this before, elsewhere. Uplift moderation tends to fall into the same patterns each time. There was a lot of... The translator missed a word and bleeped. When we arrived. A lot of fear, suspicions and demands. But the interest faded when everyone realized we few spacefarers were here by ourselves, that our ship had left, that we had no way back home, no technology, no tech skills, no engineering, no science. We weren't here to jump you forward in technology. Sydney smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. So, your own version of the Prime Directive? Garnaak tingled uncomfortably. While en route, all he'd been able to digest was video transmissions sent generations before. Once arriving, though, he'd tried to absorb as much human culture as possible through their electronic mediums. He particularly enjoyed their comedic renditions of contact with galactic species. Every encounter seemed to be solved with mass projectors flinging small hunks of metal. Silly. Garnaak wasn't aware of any other race that used chemical propellant to accelerate projectiles through small handheld tubes pointed at newfound galactic emissaries. But some video stories contained wisdom beyond expectations for this young race. Yes, in fact, non-interference. That was an astute observation by one of your wisest storytellers. We don't call it that. But the principle is a central precept for every mission, for every one of us. Garnaak returned to his explanation. But it should be no surprise to you, I am sure, that the attention span of most humans is too short to keep us on the front page. Eventually, your government leadership worldwide told us to make ourselves at home and let us wander freely without much expectation in return. They didn't abandon us, but we weren't of much use to them if we were only here to observe and talk to you. They got bored with us after the first couple of years of constant interrogation with no quantum revelations in tech, so we were allowed to disperse across your various continents, each to a different nation, as many as we could cover. Their sole requirement was that we'd all be on call to show up when asked, which is exactly what we had hoped for. Garnaak waited to gauge Sydney's reaction. The human stared into the distance, inscrutable. So, Sid, what else would you like to know? Questions? Oh, I don't have too many. Not important ones, anyway. I figure if we need to know anything else, they will let us know, you know, when the time comes. He glanced at Garnaak, his expression light but probing. Right? Garnaak's hues rainbowed. He was not sure his translator provided an accurate assessment of the query.
"Yes," he replied.
Sydney chuckled again, turning his gaze back to the lake. Yeah, maybe they just weren't asking the right questions? They lapsed into silence, watching the two ladies glide in the fading light across the water. Garnaak could feel unspoken queries hovering between them, but Sydney was skilled. His approach was friendly and disarming, yet Garnaak sensed that Sydney was probing, looking for something without making it obvious. "You know," Sydney said after a while, his voice casual again, "it's funny how things line up sometimes, like me moving in next door. Of all the places I could have ended up, the odds of that must be pretty small, right? Next to the only Xtro here at the Cape?" Garnaak blinked, watching Sydney carefully now, still uncomfortable with the use of the term Xtro.
"Perhaps," he said,
his voice monotone.
"Coincidences are often not as random as they appear."
Sydney smiled at that, leaning back from the rail. "Yeah, funny thing, coincidences. You start noticing patterns, and they don't seem so random after all." Garnaak let his gaze drift back to the lake, sensing the deeper meaning behind Sydney's words. There was no direct challenge, no open suspicion, but the undertone was there. Sydney was watching him, perhaps as closely as Garnaak was watching the humans. "I suppose we'll figure it out," Sydney said, raising his glass in a mock toast. "One way or another." Garnaak also leaned away from the railing, acknowledging their unspoken dance.
"Yes," he agreed, "we will."
The shift in the relationship with his neighbour had been gradual and imperceptible, but now Garnaak saw it for what it was and how deliberate it had been. Orchestrated. Perhaps even the visit with his granddaughter was part of it. These humans were far more adept and skilled than he had ever fathomed. There was much to learn on both sides.
Chapter 9. Garnaak had experienced the universe and all that could be imagined, and nothing surprised him any more. But this time he found himself unprepared, especially for his own reaction, unbidden. It was later in the spring, and the balcony felt unusually still. The soft evening rustling of the palm fronds was the only sound that reached Garnaak. His three eyes scanned the calm lake. Two focused on the far shore, where the two ladies always appeared, while his other eye instinctively glanced at Sydney sitting beside him. "They're late today," Sydney remarked, sipping his drink. Tonight, something was wrong. The two ladies, the ducks that had become such a central fixture in his quiet observations, were conspicuously absent. Garnaak blinked, scanning the water again, more deliberately this time. There, in the distance, one of the ducks appeared. Her gliding was almost hesitant, weaving to and fro as though searching, looking for her missing companion. Garnaak didn't reply immediately, watching the lone duck as she paddled along the familiar route the pair had taken for so many years. But tonight there were no synchronized ripples, no easy companionship, just a solitary form, her trail spreading out soulfully across the quiet lake. Garnaak's gillicles shrilled, emitting wailing sounds no human had heard before, and the translator could find no words to express the anguish Garnaak felt. His entire being resonated with the loss, a profound sorrow transcending translation. "They are not late," Garnaak finally chirped, his translator turning solemn, his hue fading to grey. "One of them is gone." Sydney turned,
his eyes narrowing as he followed Garnaak's gaze. His smile faded, and his face also greying as realization dawned. Oh. The two sat for a long time, absorbing the despair of the remaining duck. Garnaak sagged on his stool, his limbs feeling heavy, his thoughts tangled in an unfamiliar sensation. Could it be grief? He had witnessed many rituals of death throughout the universe and observed from afar how each species marked the passing of their own kind. But this felt different, simpler, quieter, and somehow profound. "She's searching," Garnaak said, his gillicles hardly vibrating, his translator scarcely audible. "She is looking for the other, as if she might return." Sydney put his glass down, leaning forward on his knees. "That's what happens with us too, you know. We're very mortal, not like you. We don't live indefinitely until we choose to let go. We know it deep down, and it colours us every day and everything we do." The solitary lady paddled close to the shore, glancing upward toward the balcony as if she knew they were watching. She crawled out on the bank and turned back to face the water, forlornly scanning, craning her neck, looking back and forth. Pausing, staring, hoping, confused. A fruitless vigil, not understanding why she was alone now. She stood there more than an hour, watching, waiting, as the sky fell into darkness. Garnaak kept looking down at the duck, her slight form barely visible in the fading light, wondering out loud. Perhaps she will adjust. Then, as if giving up her search, she crawled back into the water and very slowly paddled away, to settle in the nearest reeds, disappearing from view. Garnaak tightened, his gillicles twitching and fluting plaintively in response to the strange ache blooming within him. He had not expected to feel this loss. He had spent years studying humanity, learning their ways and understanding their nature. But in the simplicity of these ducks, he had found something beyond the complexities of human conflict. A quiet union that endured without question. And he finally understood that he also sensed it in the humans around him. "What happens now?" Sydney's voice broke the stillness. Garnaak blinked all three eyes in turn. "Will she find a new companion?" Sydney was unsure. "You're asking me? You know more about them than I do." "I do not know. Your libraries have taught me that some animals and birds are monogamous for life and will remain alone. The linkage they shared, it cannot be replaced." Sydney stared straight ahead, his face somber. "We never get over it either. We just learn to live with it. We have no choice. We move forward." Garnaak watched Sydney, his thoughts swirling. He had seen humans grieve and react to loss, but now he began to understand. The ducks, these simple creatures, had shown him a greater truth, a universal reality shared across species and worlds. Loss was not bound to one form of life or one way of thinking. It was intrinsic to the universe itself. And yet, even in this quiet sorrow, there was something else, a resilience. The lone duck had settled into the evening, her tiny body at peace in the growing darkness. "Perhaps," Garnaak murmured, "this is a part of being alive, to lose and to continue." Sydney exhaled. "Yeah, you're right. It's tough, though." He leaned back in his chair, looking up at the sky. "We keep going, like her, until we can go no further." Garnaak allowed his eyes to drift back to the lake, the ripples long gone. He felt the consequence of the loss, but alongside it, the fortitude of the one who remained. At that moment, Garnaak grasped that this was a lesson he had been waiting to learn, not from humans, but from these ducks, two simple creatures who had navigated their way of life without words, without the convolutions of politics or war. And now one had gone, leaving the other to carry on, until she could go no further. That was humanity, and he knew that they were ready. Chapter 10. Another week, another mission. The cargo plane landed as usual, the turboprops reversing thrust to brake to a halt, stirring Garnaak from contemplation. He had long grown accustomed to Earth's primitive modes of transportation, but something about this trip felt different. Adriana Brookstone had called, but this time it was unusual. She requested his attendance nearby, in the hemisphere where he lived, not in her domain around the other side of the globe. And no accompanying Tarek this time. His three eyes contracted, adjusting to the brightness as the rear cargo door groaned upward and the ramp lowered. To his surprise, Sydney stood there at the base of the ramp, shielding his eyes from the sun. "Sydney?" Garnaak's translator squawked. Sydney nodded but said nothing, waving for Garnaak to disembark. Garnaak hesitated, his mind in turmoil. He had expected to be greeted by the usual logistical crew, not his neighbour. Why was Sydney here? What could he have to do with Garnaak's business? And yet, Sydney did not explain. Just a brief gesture toward the flatbed truck parked nearby, its cargo bed already prepped for him. "Get in the back, Garnaak," Sydney said, his voice tight, pronouncing the name precisely for the very first time. Something about his tone was off, strained in a way Garnaak had not heard before. His three limbs adjusted stiffly as he climbed into the flatbed, the wind blowing dust swirls around them. Sydney climbed into the cab and told the driver to proceed. Garnaak's thoughts sparked wildly as the truck rushed into the desert. Sydney's silence was odd, and though Garnaak was not prone to paranoia, he couldn't help but wonder what was happening. A fleeting thought crossed his mind. Was this an alien abduction? The truck rumbled and bounced through cattle guards and tire shredders, passing dozens of nondescript factory buildings, vast stretches of concrete, and tarred parking areas filled with thousands of human motor vehicles. They finally stopped at what appeared to be a sprawling manufacturing facility, voluminous buildings stretching into the distance. Garnaak squinted, scanning the complex through the dust cloud settling around the truck. Sydney jumped out and gestured once again for Garnaak to follow. Garnaak complied, his unease growing. They reached a large garage door, which Sydney pulled upward with a metallic screech, revealing an empty, windowless interior. He waved Garnaak in and stood to the side. Garnaak's three eyes examined the space as he trundled in, but before he could turn to question Sydney, the door rolled down, locking him inside with a resounding clang. He was alone. Time passed slowly in the empty space, the sinister stillness weighing heavily against Garnaak's rational control. His thoughts churned. He had encountered strange situations before, but this level of secrecy was unsettling. What did this mean? Had he misjudged Sydney all along? Misread signs and signals that a human might have detected? After what felt like hours, a side door unbolted and creaked open. The click of heels echoed through the room as a figure entered. Marcia, Sydney's daughter. Not what Garnaak expected. She didn't speak immediately, pacing the length of the garage with deliberate steps, her head pivoting and her eyes locked on Garnaak like a radar, as if sizing him up for the 100th time. Finally, she came to a halt directly before him, crossing her arms, launching into her discourse without preamble. "We have so many stories of you suppressing us," she began, her voice calm but with an underlying edge. "Conquering us, holding us back, not wanting us out there exploring the stars. We'd gotten used to the idea of having to come out guns blazing. A space force with an armed starfleet. All those stories where you hunt us down like prey and kill us indiscriminately, without remorse."
Garnaak's gillicles fluted randomly, a signal of his confusion. His translator offered no immediate response, only stillness. He closed all three eyes, waiting, then widened them warily to watch the angry woman. He suggested, "We thought those were comedies, a way to laugh at yourselves, to blame others for your own proclivities." Marsha's lips pressed into a thin line as she paced again, her voice quickening. "We knew those stories were fiction, but in truth, we also know more now. It was our own fault. It was self-projection, a reflection of our own history and our own behavior towards one another. The very horrors we have wrought on ourselves are what we expected from you." She stopped, biting her lip. "Where do you think our nightmares came from?" She paused, letting the question hang in the air. "Did you plant them? Did your kind seed those fears on your previous visits? To keep us scared? To terrify us into staying here?" "I do not think so," Garnaak twittered, the translator's rendition placid despite the tense air. "But I was not here. What I do know is that you have centuries of humans striving to obtain and maintain power and control over their fellow humans. We've watched and have always been surprised at your willingness to be subjugated by others of your own kind. How could you do that when you are all fundamentally created equal? Fear. One of your wisest sages once told you, 'Fear is the mind killer.' He was right." Marsha's gaze sharpened. "And you watched and waited. Watched while we struggled to figure ourselves out. Waited to see if we could do it without obliterating ourselves in the process." "Yes," Garnaak admitted, his gillicles vibrating. "We observe. We do not interfere. It would be best to grow at your own pace and make your own path. Anything more would hinder you." Marsha took a deep breath and exhaled slowly, the tension in her frame dissipating. "I've always suspected that. But it still angers me that you had the knowledge, the technology, and yet all you did was watch. You could have saved us so much despair, so much violence, so much destruction." Garnaak blinked. "It was necessary. We could not rob you of your journey." Marsha reset, her eyes narrowing. "Garnaak." She paused. She had pronounced his name exactly right, as precisely as Sydney had done at the airport, as well as Lily had voiced weeks before. She sighed, and Garnaak thought he perceived a sense of relief in her tone as she continued, "My father trusts you. Something about you and two ladies made quite the impression on him. You've probably figured it out by now." She let the message sink in. "There are no coincidences," she added. Cautiously, Garnaak only said, "I see." "Well,
It seems we're ready for that next step. The inside garage door rolled up at her signal, opening into a cavernous facility bustling with humans and machines. "Come," she said, her voice melting, less severe now. "There's something you need to see." Chapter 11. Marcia led Garnaak into an enormous aerospace plant. She walked quickly, leading Garnaak, trusting that he would follow. Workers stopped and stared as they proceeded down the yellow-striped aisles. They passed row upon row of assembly lines, past the first stages of chemical boosters, past hundreds of rocket upper stages, past numerous glass-walled satellite cleanrooms. Garnaak's eyes roamed in every direction, and he wondered why he was there. He could tell these were the rockets he saw from his balcony at the Cape, launching like clockwork. At every section of the plant, the humans ceased their tasks and rubbernecked as he passed. "Who are you?" he asked Marcia, loud enough through his translator to startle the onlookers. Marcia stopped and pivoted to Garnaak. "I run this place," she said matter-of-factly, an ironic smile brightening her face. Garnaak could hear snickers from the nearest humans. "Adriana Brookstone and I are old friends," she continued, "and my father works for me. As I said, there are no coincidences." She let that sink in. "That's why you're here now. They vetted you." Marcia resumed her pace and led Garnaak to an imposing wall with a ceiling-high vault door. Two humans stood sentry and nodded to her, activating hydraulic controls. The massive steel and concrete pivoted, and the atmosphere displaced with a hiss. Garnaak could sense something new, anticipation at the low rumble of energy vibrating through the walls. As they entered the final hangar, Garnaak's eyes widened in bewilderment. Before he could take in the scope of what he saw, a tiny human rushed toward him and grabbed his gloved claw. "Garnaak!" Lily's voice was high and excited as she tugged him to stoop to her level. He lowered himself cautiously, and she pressed her tiny frame against him. He stiffened before carefully wrapping one of his arms around her. She hugged him with all her tiny human strength, her face beaming with the joy of seeing him again. Before he could respond, a young man approached. Garnaak was jolted with recognition and wondered how this could be the one he had seen before, the confident, questioning one from his desert meeting in the tent with Tarek. "No coincidences," Marcia had said. The young man tapped Lily on the shoulder. Sydney appeared out of nowhere and stood at Marcia's side. "Lily, let Andreas show him," he said. "Garnaak, old friend, this is Andreas. I believe you've encountered him before. He's one of our best, most inspired engineers." Lily reluctantly let go, stepping aside as Garnaak turned his attention to the engineer and the massive structure in the center of the hangar. His eyes crossed reflexively, flicking back and forth, up and down, and then widened, taking in the incomprehensible thing before him. Andreas was pleased with Garnaak's reaction. "Yes," he responded, even though Garnaak's question was unformed and unasked. "Beautiful, isn't she? She's fully operational." Garnaak's translator squawked, unbidden. "An operational starship, human-made." "We built it," Andreas said, "because we knew it was possible." His voice filled with pride. "And because you were here." Sydney chimed in. "You didn't interfere. You just wanted to get to know us." Garnaak remained frozen in place, absorbing the enormity of the moment. He had spent years observing humanity struggle with its conflicts, limitations, and aspirations. And yet, here they were, standing on the brink, accomplishing something none of his fellow spacefarers thought possible. "We didn't need your technology," Andreas continued. He smiled at Garnaak and offered an analogy. "We have a dictum from an old physicist. Paraphrased, it goes, The process of observing something changes it. We did this ourselves. Your arrival was all it took.
Garnaak's gillicles bassooned musically, a rare deep resonance passing through him, echoing through the hangar, the closest he could come to a cheer of happiness. He fluttered all three eyes, bowing in acknowledgement. Humanity had grown. They had pushed through their internal conflicts and history of division and came to this point on their own terms. And interestingly enough, he realized that the physics dictum also applied to him. He'd been observed, and the two ladies had undoubtedly changed him. Marcia turned to Garnaak, her eyes misty, arms wrapped around her father and pulling her daughter closer. "We want you to know, we're ready to join you out there. Will you show us what's next?" Garnaak felt gravity settle on his many limbs, but for the first time he did not feel it as a burden. Instead, he felt hope. "Yes," he trilled, "it is time." The end. This has been Garnaak and the Two Ladies, written by David Neyland, narrated by Adam Stone, and ElevenLabs V3 AI-generated voice. Copyright 2024 and 2026, David Neyland. All rights reserved. Production copyright 2026, David Neyland. All rights reserved.